She's the face of courage. That's how politicians and public figures around the world are describing Gisèle Pelicot after her ex-husband was sentenced to 20 years in prison for drugging her, raping her and inviting dozens of strangers to rape her too. 76 of the men were also handed jail terms today, ranging from 3 to 8 years for their crimes. All the men, including Dominique Pelicot, were found guilty of rape or sexual assault. The sentences cap off what has been a landmark trial that sparked a wider debate about rape culture in France and beyond. Gisèle herself has become a feminist hero. The 72-year-old could have demanded that the trial be kept behind closed doors, but instead she asked for it to be held in public in the hopes that it would help other women speak up about their abuse too. Siobhan Silk has more now on the verdicts delivered today.
The woman who walked into court throughout this trial with her head held high walked out after the verdicts the same way. Gisèle Pelicot, a picture of courage and resilience after a decade of druggings and brutal rapes at the bidding of her then husband, then a grueling 3.5-month trial under the eyes of the world.
I want to express a most profound gratitude to all those who have supported me throughout this ordeal. Your stories have moved me deeply, and they've given me the strength needed to return day after day for these long hearings.
On Thursday, the verdicts finally came. Gisèle's ex-husband, Dominique Pelicot, was found guilty and handed the maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. His 50 co-accused, 50 strangers whom Pelicot recruited to rape his then wife, also all found guilty on charges of rape, attempted rape or sexual assault. Their sentences range from 3 to 15 years, with some partially suspended. A disappointment to the prosecution, who had demanded prison terms of up to 18 years.
The sentences were reduced, and it's a good thing. I continue to think that Dominique Pelicot's ultimate crime is to have brought down with him 50 men who are not meant to find themselves here today.
Gisèle Pelicot said she respected the court's decision, but her supporters are bitterly disappointed by what they see as light punishments.
It makes a mockery of everyone, a mockery of us, and a mockery of sexist and sexual violence. I don't even have the words. We're completely disillusioned.
Even at this time, Gisèle Pelicot's thoughts are with other people who may be suffering in silence.
I think of the victims who have not been recognized, whose stories are often hidden. I want you to know that we share the same fight.
Her own story might have stayed in the shadows if not for her decision to waive her anonymity and allow the trial to be held in public.
By opening the doors of this trial on September 2nd, I wanted society to be a witness to the debates that took place. I have never regretted making this decision.
As the guilty men now begin their prison sentences, the enduring image of this trial will be the superhuman strength of Gisèle Pelicot, the survivor who became an icon.
Well, as we've been mentioning, Gisèle Pelicot bravely chose to waive her right to anonymity, and throughout the trial, she looked each of her rapists in the eye. In court, she didn't just demand justice for herself, but said it's time for sweeping changes in a society that trivializes such abuses. And Maxwell has more.
Greeted with cheers and applause outside the courtroom, as she has been every day since the trial began.
I just hope that her case will help justice to change.
She do it to give strength to all the women who don't have the courage to go on trial, to fight.
Gisèle Pelicot has been hailed for her bravery from her first appearance at the courthouse in Avignon. Under French law, she could have asked for the trial to play out behind closed doors. But Gisèle Pelicot says that it wasn't bravery, but a will to change society and to raise awareness of the use of drugs to rape women that prompted her to opt for a public trial.
When you're raped, there is shame. And it's not for us to have shame, it's for them.
While discreet in front of the news cameras, Gisèle Pelicot has addressed the court 3 times. The 72-year-old grandmother and former logistics manager has said she is totally destroyed by the abuse inflicted on her by what she thought of as her loving husband for a decade. over which time she saw doctors for gynecological problems and what she feared was Alzheimer's from her unexplained blackouts.
I've lost 10 years of my life that I'll never make up for. This scar will never heal.
Addressing her ex-husband in court, she asked the question she may never get to the bottom of.
How could you have betrayed me to this point? Whatever trauma you go through in childhood, there's a point when you choose the way you're going to be in life.
She also condemned the cowardice of the dozens of men accused of raping her at her husband's behest, who claim they didn't realise it was rape.
It's time that the macho, patriarchal society that trivialises rape changes.
The historic trial has made a feminist icon of Gisèle Pelicot, sparking demonstrations of solidarity, as well as debate over sexual violence, masculinity, and the critical issue of consent. Many hope, as she does, that it will mark a turning point in France.
Let's talk more about this mass rape trial's impact with Héma Sibi, who joins us now. Great to have you, Héma. Thanks so much for joining us. You're, of course, a spokesperson for Mouvement du Nid, a feminist organisation here in France. Now, you've been following this trial closely. You've appeared on the programme here at France 24 to speak to us about the trial and its impact. Are you satisfied with today's outcome?
Today's outcome is pretty satisfying in the sense that the court condemned Dominique Pelicot to the highest sentence. And what is commendable is that all the men that were accused of rape were actually found guilty. It can be regrettable, unfortunately, that these 50 other accused had a lighter sentence than what was requested by prosecution. This disparity may suggest that, they were sort of like mere Muppets that were under the influence of Dominique Pelicot. What we need to acknowledge is that a man who rapes is a man who rapes, and there should be no lighter consequences for these actions. That being said, the verdict has shaken French society to its core, not only because of its horror, but because of the courage of Gisèle Pelicot standing tall to get justice from the abusers and from the 51 men who raped her. She became a real voice for all the women who have been victims of predatory men in France. And I think this sentence really has the merit of also shifting the judicial focus on the actions of the perpetrators. This time, and for once, it wasn't the actions of the victim that was scrutinized, but rather the actions of the men that were abusers.
Yeah, let's talk a bit about Gisèle Pelicot, because, of course, at the beginning of this trial, she was, just an ordinary grandmother, and she wore sunglasses even in court, and now she's emerged as this image of strength. Talk to us about her impact, the fact that she had this trial be held in public. Talk about the impact that has on French society.
It has probably an indelible mark on French society. And the fact that she refused to, that she waived her right to anonymity, which is typically granted in cases of sexual violence, is so powerful. By doing so, she invited society to not only stand in solidarity with her, because women were waiting in her trial every day, women were applauding for her, but she also allowed society to look at who were the men who perpetrate sexual violence and ensuring that they would not escape the consequences of this public reckoning. What society saw in this trial was that the men who rape and the rapist is not this sort of monster alienated from society, but it's precisely the men that are around us, just any men. They come from all walks of life. They have very different profiles. They don't have just one origin or ethnicity. They don't have one social background. They come from all walks of life, but what they have in common is that they're men. So by, just opening the door to the trial, she allowed for women to stand in support with her. She allowed for men to support her too. And this trial has caused a lot of protests to erupt all over France in solidarity with Gisèle, but also of women just screaming their anger against men's violence across the country. So it has had a huge impact. And I think women's rights in France have been marked by several big trials, and the Gisèle Pelicot for sure is one of them. There will be a before and after this trial.
Yeah, some people are saying that there will be a sort of Pelicot effect now on French society. I want to talk about French laws because this case has, of course, shone a light on consent here in France and the fact that it's not part of the French Penal Code. Can you see a consent provision being added to the laws here in France anytime soon?
It is currently a debate that is taking place, and it's also a debate that is, stirring a lot of discussions in the feminist movement. What we can see is that the current definition of rape for this specific trial allowed for the accused to be convicted, because in France we have the element of rape by surprise, and since the victim was chemically submitted, the surprise element was the one that was held by the justice to hold these perpetrators accountable. So a lot of debates are going on towards including consent on the definition of rape or not, but I'm not sure that we will know soon enough if this will happen or not.
And Héma, I want to circle back to something you were mentioning just before about the fact that many of the men involved in this trial, many of the defendants are everyday men. They're men that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. I think there's a journalist among them, a firefighter also among them. So these are men that we can encounter at any time. Where has society gone wrong to the point that these ordinary men can be involved in such horrific acts?
I think this case was the case of the rape culture. And that's where society went wrong, is that we have some very patriarchal structures that are a part of our systems and that foster the fact that women, the violence against women, that men's violence against women is actually organized and is allowed and enabled in France by this very rape culture. We saw in this trial that the rapist, and Gisèle Pelicot said it herself, is not someone who just attacks you in a parking lot in the dark at night. We saw in this trial that actually raping was a part of a strategy, which we can call the perpetrator strategy. No, the rapist is not someone who is acting on behalf of some sort of irrepressible sexual needs. While this notion is very archaic, we need to acknowledge that the rapist is someone who carefully plans this violent act. This was the case in the Pelicot case, because the rapists were all meeting on this website called coco.fr, a website which was very well known in France for gathering pimps, sex buyers, abusers, for having pedocriminal images and pornographic content of children. This website has so many charges, judicial charges, even one for murders. And they all met on this website. They all clicked on the forum without her knowledge. They all discussed with Dominique Pelicot, and they all went through with the rape of Gisèle Pelicot. So this was a strategy. And the defense arguments that were highlighted really shows how deeply sexual violence is entrenched in the French society, because they really underlined a vision of women as interchangeable commodities, as properties of their husband, as being sort of dispossessed of any of their free will if the husband gave his authorization over them. So it's not just about Gisèle Pelicot, it's about all women.
Héma, great to have you. Thanks so much for giving us your insight there. That's Héma Sibi, who is a spokesperson for the movement, the association called Mouvement du Nid. She just joined us there. Thanks so much for giving us your insight.